All right, so let's pick up where we left off. We were about to get rid of these bullets on this list and deal with the UL padding that you see here on the left. So let's go ahead and select, first of all, let's select this UL. And because there's not currently a rule for that, let's go ahead and click this plus symbol. And we don't just want it to be the UL in general. We want it to be the UL that's inside of the nav, and we want the nav that is inside of section banner. And the reason that we're being so specific is that just in case we decide to put a nav bar somewhere else ever on this page, then that way we know that these rules will only apply to that particular navigation list. Okay, so first thing that we want to do is, I said that if you look down here, it's applying this 40 pixel padding, right? So let's get rid of that. So we'll say padding and then 0. Okay, and then you see right away that it removes the padding. Now, one of the things that it might seem like to you is that the bullets are gone. Well, they're not really. They just appear to be gone. So if we just deselect that for a moment, let's make sure that they're really and truly gone so that they never just rear their ugly heads. We'll leave this crossed out for a moment. See, we can turn it on and off, which is wonderful. Now let's go and click on a list item. Okay, and again, the list item doesn't have any kind of special styling either. So what we can do is add a new rule. And again, we're going to do its ancestry tree. So we'll say that it is part of section banner, and it's going to be the list item inside of the UL, inside of the nav, inside of the section banner. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to say list, and you see it starts to pop up right away, and it's called list style, and we need to say none. Okay, and then the bullets disappear. So we want that to stay the way it is so that it has no bullets. And then if we go back to this UL, we can turn the padding back off. All right, you see it still does bump it over. So those are two separate issues, okay? And if we were to jump over here to the inspector, we could take these rules, copy them, and let's jump back in our section where we've got our navigation information. I'm going to put it right under nav because that kind of precedes the anchor tag information. And then you see that it kind of like gets all wonky. Well, what I can do is I can select everything that's not tabbed in, and I can just hit the tab button and it'll go right in the way it's supposed to. And right here, I think I'm going to tab that in so that it's obvious too. All right, so here's what we've got. We save that, and if we come back over here now and we refresh the page, see our inspector style sheet disappears, but it kept all of our styles, which is exactly what we want. Now, the other thing that I want to deal with is like, God, that picture is gigantic. It's way, way too big. So let's deal with making that smaller. First of all, I should let you know that images are inline elements. They do not natively take up an entire block. The way that you would tell it to take up an entire block is to change its inherent properties by telling it to be a display type of block. Well, we're not going to do that. We don't need to in this particular instance. Sometimes you need to change images to block, but in this case we don't. I'm going to jump back over here to Elements, Collapse Nav, and then I'll go into the article where that header is and where the image is. And you'll see that we've just got this giant picture, and it is, if I hover, you see up here in yellow, right about here where I'm circling, it says what the image's native size is. It's 649 by 649 pixels. And you'll notice that no matter how small I make the screen, it retains its image size. That is the way that images will natively work. They will not get small unless you do a scaling on them. And the way that you have to do scaling is you can't just tell it, normally you can't just set a width on it. What you really need to be able to do is tell that parent how wide it is, and the parent in this case is the header. You need to say specifically how wide the parent is, and then you scale the image, and it will go based off of its parent size. It doesn't have to be the direct parent. It could be an ancestor, like it could be this up here, right? But for now, like what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select this header over in the HTML side, and we already have a rule for it. And so what I'm going to do is just tell it to be a width of 100%. It already is 100% natively, okay? But sometimes you actually have to specify the width. In this case, just so you know, if you were to try to scale the image in advance, it might actually work for you in some browsers. Just know that it wouldn't necessarily work in all browsers if you didn't set the width for its parent, okay? So go ahead and set the width for the header to 100%. And then if you come to the image, now you see it jumps to that place that we've already created in our style sheet. And what I can do is now I can set the width to be some scaled version of that, and let's say 25%, and if I scroll back up, you can see that that's much better. Now, if we scale, it just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller because it is, as we told it to be, 25%. So, you know, I don't necessarily want it to get bigger than a certain size or smaller than a certain size. So if that's the case, and, you know, especially if you think about the way it might look on a phone or something. So what you can also do with pretty much any element that you're setting width for is you can also set a minimum width and a maximum width. And the rules for that are called max dash width. You see it wants to autocomplete here. And for the max width, I'm going to say that I don't want it to get any larger than about 300 pixels, okay? And then the minimum width, I don't want it to get any smaller than, say, 125 pixels. And the way that this works is that if I were to put the max width before the regular width, then the regular width would wipe out the max width, because the way that HTML, or excuse me, CSS works is that it will read the last accretive rules last, and those will trump anything that came before it. And if the rule is utilizing the same property, or in this case a very similar property, then it will logically override whatever preceded it. So in this case, if I had said max width and then min width and then width would be the one that trumps max and min. So width has to come first, and it says, okay, it's going to be 25%, and then we put the filters on and say, okay, but we don't want it to get bigger than 300, and we don't want it to be smaller than 125, okay? So this is okay to set in a percentage, right? But then we want to actually max it out at a certain pixel dimension, because that's ultimately really and truly the way that pixels are, or that pictures are rendered, is with pixels, okay? So let's go ahead and do a quick test, and you see it gets bigger, but then if I make it even larger and I keep scaling, it does max out at a certain size, okay? And if you wanted to really test it, we could say that the max is 200, all right? And you can see that it did in fact max itself out, all right? And so let's just say that we don't want it bigger than 300 though. Let's go back there. Okay. All right, so now that that's done, let's pull this back over. Let's take a quick peek at our example that we were looking at before. And you see that there's this background image. All right, I'm going to show you how you can utilize background images before we start, you know, moving things around on the page and so forth. Let's go ahead and jump over to a website. It is called transparenttextures.com, and it's all run together. It's TRANSPARENTTEXTURES.com. Okay, and there are two T's in the center where transparent ends and texture begins. Okay, so if you go to this website, you're going to notice that there's a lot of black on the page, especially if you start up at the very top. Also because there are a lot of images loading here, you might notice that it takes a little bit of time for some of the page to load. Just give it a chance. But what's nice is that you can actually kind of use this to look and see how different ones of these background images look with color overlaid, or color behind them, in fact. So one of the ones, you could just scroll and find one that you like. I actually prefer that you not use the one that I use in the demo, because I want you to experiment. If you were to go down and find, there's one called connected, and that's the one I'm using. Let's get to it right there. And then what you could do is you could say, all right, well, I'm using a color, specific color. You could jump over to your palette and say, all right, well, if this is the color that it's supposed to be working with, I could jump back to my page, and then I can put that hexadecimal value right here in the color picker. And then you see what it does is that it changes the color of behind all of these textures. And because these are transparent PNG images, you're able to see through the opacity levels of the image to get the color that's behind it. Now, if you decide that you want to just download the image as is, you can click on download and then use levels of color. And that's what I'm going to do because I'm not just going to have one single color. You could also create your own wallpaper that has that color built into it. So I'm going to go ahead and just download mine. It's going to ask me where I want to keep it, and I'm going to put it inside of images in my particular project images folder. Okay, it's called connected.png. And then now, if I want to go and add a background to my banner, I would select my banner and then see where it says background. I already have a color set. Well, I told you that I wanted you to use background that was a shorthand rule because we're going to add an additional value or several additional values possibly. So if I go and put a space after the hexadecimal number, then what I can do is type URL, and I'm going to put open and close parentheses, and I'll go inside of those parentheses, and I need to type the image pathway to that URL. And in this case, if you're not sure what it is, you could go back and look at your file system. I happen to know that it's images/connected, because that's the file name, .png. And if it's misspelled, then it's not going to work. Okay, and then it updates it for me, and I can actually see in real time what this looks like, which is fantastic. So if you wanted to just take a really quick peek and look at your file system, in fact, what we can do here is jump over to Komodo Edit, and then we can open our places. I'll toggle left open. You see what we've got is this is the file, the index.html. This is our style sheet. Okay, this is the style sheet that we're actually currently working in. From the style sheet to get to that images file or to that connected file, we'd have to go to images/connected.png, and so that's the way that's working. Okay, so let's jump back over to our browser, and if you can imagine now, there are other places that where we would want that. Instead of me copying and pasting from here, I want to show you another alternative. If I click back over to sources and I find where I just created that, I can also clean my file up a little bit, that extra line. I'm going to copy this whole background rule because I want to put the same background rule for my footer. So if I come here, get rid of that, and I'm going to replace that entire background declaration block in my footer, and then you'll see down in my footer that it also updates there. Now, I also, in my example, you see that I also have it behind these other articles. Well, instead of copying the whole rule, I'm not going to do that because I don't want that hexadecimal value. I just want the URL information, so I'm going to copy that. And oh, and by the way, make sure you don't put a space after this URL between the L and the opening parenthesis, because some browsers might give you trouble with that where it won't render it properly. So I'm going to go and find the article rule, and you see it's right here, and it needs to come after, or it should come after the hexadecimal number. If I paste that, you see now it updates, and I've got a background image everywhere. Now you don't have to put yours right there. You could have, if you wanted to, you could have gone and put it as a background to the entire page or whatever, but if you're following along with me and you just want to keep it consistent, I'm putting it not on the actual body, I'm putting it in certain key locations. Okay, just wanted to show you that you can have multiple backgrounds in multiple places. Just be kind of careful not to make things too busy. Okay, so I'm going to do that thing again where I copy my entire styles from the style sheet, come back over here, select all, paste, save, and then I can test it by now refreshing my page, and everything looks the same, so we're all good.